Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my Kislev army guide for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaigns. One of the things to mention about Kislev campaigns is they're very front-ended because of the huge number of legendary lords that you have near you. So you have Frot, you have Trog, you have Azazel, you have Azak potentially, you have Draika potentially, though you can avoid fighting Draika and Azak thankfully. Especially if you're not playing Katrin. But then you have Arbol, you have Archeon, you have the Demon Prince. So you have a lot of fighting potential early on, and Kislev campaigns are dictated by the early game more so than anything else. And speaking about the early game, let's talk about the army leaders you want to invest in. One of the things you can use as Kislev is the load save character system in order to get Ice Witches and Frost Maidens. We'll talk about heroes in just a bit. Essentially, you want to use every single hero of Kislev. But regardless, with Ice Witches, they're the best army leaders of Kislev, partly because of the traits. You're looking at logistics, you're looking at upkeep benefits, you're looking at things like magical benefits for your army, so why wouldn't you use an Ice Witch? You can summon a Snow Leopard in a battle, you get, Glacial Blast, for instance. And Tempest Magic is ridiculously good. Like, Hawks of Miska can basically annihilate an enemy army, or you can let them blob up on a hero, though not usually recommended given the heroes that Kislev has, or you can let them blob up on a single entity, say a Frostworm, and just blow them up. Then you have Blizzard. This is a huge damage spell. You start with Biting Wind, you can improve your charge bonus, you can improve your range and accuracy. So yeah, Tempest Magic is really the way to go. If we weren't so limited in terms of Ice Witches, I would consider, of course, to some extent, Ice Magic, but the thing about Ice Magic, it's more of a support magic. Yes, you do have some damage spells, but mainly the value proposition isn't found in Death Frost or in Heart of Winter. It's found in, using the Vortex or the Cone attack to slow down enemies. It's found in Ice Sheet, slowing down enemies by quite a bit. It's found in buffing your units. So that is the main value proposition, and ultimately, when it really comes down to it, Tempest Magic is just generally going to be more useful. You do have limited Winds of Magic, so would you rather have a really powerful spell or several really powerful spells that do a lot of damage to the enemy army, or would you rather have support spells? From my perspective, having pure damage spells, or more of them, as well as that range benefit, is usually more useful. As for other army leaders, the only reason you want to use them is if you either want melee capability with the Boyar, because of that melee skill line, as well as some skills in the campaign that can be useful at times, but really, vast majority of times, Ice Witches are the way to go. But you do have limitations on how many you can have, unless you've got like 20 saved up, then load save character system. And even if you have 20 saved up, you only have so many armies you can lead with them. You can argue about like, oh, we can get Frost Maidens to supplement their magic, but from my view, the main limiting factor is Frost Maidens, and just even with Frost Maidens, it's just better to focus them on Tempest Magic, largely because you'll use those for your legendary lords, as well as the fact that it gives you the ability of putting them in armies that may be led by someone that isn't an Ice Witch. As for Drazina, it's not riding a bear. It's a hybrid melee hero. There are some useful skill lines, but in pure melee capability, he loses out, and the range combat capability is not worth it. Range lords and heroes even kind of end up losing out to pure melee lords unless they get something like a dragon later on. So, dread lords with crossbows can be useful because you can put them on a dragon, so that lack of a shield doesn't matter as much, or at all. In terms of the units, really, there's two early game units you recruit. You got Kislevite warriors, and these guys are phenomenal. So they have charge defense versus large, they have charge reflection, and they have by our blood. Now, this means these guys, against pretty much anything, will not break very easily. They need to take a significant amount of damage for their leadership to start failing. And when it starts failing, you get 25 seconds on Unbreakable, and then they break. So it's really the best version of Unbreakable, temporary Unbreakable, and then they can flee the battlefield, which is one of the things Unbreakable units do suffer from, like that ability of disengaging. I mean, it can be a problem for Lords and Heroes. We can talk about how many Patriarchs I've lost in so many campaigns, but yeah. On units, it's really good. And look, this is an anti-large armor-piercing weapon damage unit. Its armor is decent. If Halberdiers were as good as this unit, I would definitely argue in favor of them, but they're not as good. So yeah, that's the reason I don't use Halberdiers in an Empire campaign, and why I use Kislev Warriors in a Kislev campaign. Then you have your regular Kossars. You're a pretty decent ranged unit that can kind of hold its own in melee, but you really don't want to use them for that role. If these guys get engaged in melee, they might win against Skaven Slaves, which is relevant against Fraud's hordes of Skaven Slaves and Clan Rats, but that's really it. And yeah, the main value proposition here is from a range perspective, but the problem is you're paying more for a ranged unit that is better than many other range units of factions early on, not because of survivability or range damage, but simply because by our blood, you know, that leadership capability is just freaking ridiculous. So they'll win a lot of range duels early on. Not that you'll have many of them in your campaign, but yeah. 4, 6 Kislev warriors, maybe 8 even, early on, with the rest of them made up of Kossars. If you don't own Shadows of Change, just get Kossars until you get armor Kossars. One of the things, though, to be said about Kislev, if you're playing Kastaltin, if you're playing Katrin, or you get Prague early on as a Stankia and Boris Ursus, is that you have a commandment to increase your recruitment capacity. So you can recruit a lot of units very quickly in a Kislev campaign. The main limiting factor may be money, but then you fight battles and you make up for that very damn quickly. So it's like just that many legendary lords. That's one of the benefits of playing a Kislev campaign. You don't need an economy, though your economy is pretty good. Like, it used to be really bad, and that scalability used to be bad, but now Kislev actually has scalability for their economy in a way that makes them pretty ridiculous. So they got pretty much what they wanted from their rework, and then you combine it with the supporter benefit. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. And one of the things to be said about Kislev armies, one has to account for the kind of different benefits you can get from supporters in terms of your army compositions, because they can buff certain units by quite a lot. For a tier 2 Kislev army, you are going to be able to get Patriarchs and Frost Maidens, quite a few of them. Hag Witches, obviously, you know, later on, because you do need a higher tier for their recruitment, but you are generally going to get the structure they come from. In fact, you may have more than enough Hag Witches and Patriarchs than you need in a campaign, though it's pretty ridiculous. Hag Witches do have different lores of magic, so they can supplement the kind of magical capability you have in an army, which is one of the reasons Ice Witches with Ice Magic are not really useful, because if you want variety in terms of magics, get Hag Witches. They're not limited in the same way. You don't have the whole training school to deal with. Patriarchs, you do have to choose which blessing you're going to get in a campaign. It's kind of a shame, because it just means really that, you know, Tor's Battle Hymn, which gives you 4 melee attack, is just generally going to be the better one. And using anything else is just kind of fluff. Even when you have multiple Patriarchs, it's like, yeah, you can get some you can get some other benefits, sure, but Tor's Battle Hymn usually wins out. Even with units where replenishment might be worth it. It's like, would you rather get replenishment, healing, or would you rather just that unit hit much harder with that melee attack? Because you won't have it. You can make Patriarch stacks if you want to, but you won't be running around most of the time with, like, so many Patriarchs you don't care. Like, if you do run around with, like, 6 Patriarchs, yes, that's a discussion, but I usually go with 3 for can maximizing casualty replenishment. And in that case, I prefer having towards battle him. And even then, most of the time, like, even with 3 is kind of saying a lot, like 2 or 3, depends on the situation I'm dealing with. Unit-wise, we do have the Armor Cossars, shielded and two-handed weapon version. Both of them really solid infantry units with a range attack. Minimal range, but a decent amount of damage. But the main value proposition, obviously, of Armor Cossars is their survival capability in a battle. And also, like, regular Armor Cossars have a silver shield. Two-handed versions have melee armor-piercing damage. You'll want both against the kind of enemies you're dealing with. Like, you want Armor Cossars with gray weapons for all the heavily armored units, especially Arbol will be recruiting, and to some extent Archeon. But for flank protection, or to just hold a line more effectively, you will want Armor Cossars with shields. They're just going to do better from that perspective. Also, they do better in auto-resolve. Then we have Akshinas. Yeah, this is kind of your bread and butter range unit that you can recruit fairly quickly in a campaign. They don't have armor-piercing damage, but they have Vanguard deployment. They do have stock, so they can stay hidden from an enemy quite effectively. And they have a decent amount of range. So they will do a good amount of damage against pretty much anything you're up against in a campaign. The only downside is, in terms of getting them early, is you might not be able to afford them, and really early on you might just argue, okay, I can get a better range unit, or I can get more armies with more regular Cossars. That's the discussion. But later on, of course, you do want to ultimately get Akshinas. Then we have Snow Leopards. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of Snow Leopards. They are a glass cannon unit. They lack HP, they lack armor, they lack survivability in general. Yes, they do have physical resistance, and yes, they have fear attacks. The main value of a Snow Leopard is chasing down enemy single entities once you've broken them. So, like, having 1 or 2 of them in a battle just to finish off certain enemies can be useful. They're good against monsters, they're good against single entities. Don't expect them to win duels, but they can help units win battles against large monsters or against enemy lords and heroes. That's the main value proposition of a Snow Leopard. Personally, I don't use them. I never recruit them in a campaign. And if I do get a Snow Leopard, I'm getting it because it's a summon ability on my ice switches. So that's how I mainly pick them up. Which is, by the way, another reason you should pick up ice switches for your lord option, because whatever they lack in melee capability is not worth the cost of both their traits and their magical capability. And also, don't underestimate ice witches in melee once they get mounts. That's when the equation changes quite a bit, because they have the best mounts available for Kislev. Because once you've leveled up enough, you can use Frostworms as a mount, and that gives them a lot of pretty solid melee capability. Sure, they will lack the melee skill line, which is fairly important when you're talking about pure melee capability, especially in duels, but against armies, Frostworms as a mount are just amazing. Much better than Warbears. And then you have, in terms of your army roster, you have Tsar Guard, available at tier 3, regular Tsar Guard, and Tsar Guard with gray weapons. Same situation as with Armor Cossars. One has armor-piercing weapon damage, another one has a shield. You also get that bonus versus infantry with Armor Cossars with gray weapons. You are lacking melee anti-large infantry. Like, yeah, it would have been great to have Armor Cossars with spears, for instance, that we have in the prologue, but still, these guys, they might not be on the level of Chosen. They're certainly not on the level of Chosen, but they can hold their own quite effectively against pretty much any heavy infantry unit in the game. Largely because not only do they have pretty good stats, various skills, various upgrades you can get for them, and Buyer Blood always do make a difference. Range units, you may want to still be using Akshinas just because of their viability in battle, or you may forgo them completely and instead go for Streltsy. The benefit of Streltsy is that they're fairly durable for a range unit. That 70 armor is no joke. They have armor-piercing weapon damage in both melee and range, and thus can do quite a heavy amount of damage against pretty much anything you're encountering in a campaign. One should not underestimate the sheer damage potential of Streltsy. Gun axes, yeah, that's quite ridiculous. Actual Streltsy did not work like that. They used the axe to support the guns, but still, I think there's mods that do that. Then we have light war sleds. So, light war sleds, decent level of armor, decent level of survivability, decent melee stats all around, decent speed. And so the benefit of these guys is that they're a skirmisher unit that can do quite a bit of damage with their skirmish capability while firing while moving, but they're also not a joke in melee. They don't have the survivability as some other heavy units, but yeah, they're great chariot units because they have 4 entities, so they don't get stuck in the same way other chariot units get stuck in with more entities. They have a fair amount of range, they have a ridiculous amount of ammunition to the point it's basically infinite. You can just run around the entire battle just with the war sled army and keep hurting the enemy, and they will struggle to catch up. Slaanesh might, and not even with their entire army, but with certain units. But you're basically able to outrun pretty much anything. And this is a huge benefit because a lot of the times you may end up fighting outnumbered as Kislev, and so having units that can peel off a portion of the enemy army, like 2, 4, 6 units, or however many you're able to peel off, depends on the number of sleds, and avoid them from engaging your main battle line, or just foregoing a main battle line, going full-on sled army is pretty great. Then we have Frostworms. Like, Frostworms are one of the best, if not the best, single entity in the game. Not because of their stats, keep in mind that. Yes, their stats are very good for a tier 3 unit. And that's the crazy part about them. They're basically an upgraded Snow Leopard. Obviously, they're bigger, so that causes some issues when you're talking about pathfinding and chasing capability. But they're pretty damn fast. They do a truckload of damage. They have a good, decent amount of charge bonus. So you have a unit that can deal with anti-large, so dealing with enemy cavalry, dealing with monsters, dealing with lords, and you can kind of just throw it in an army and let enemies surround them, and then use Streltsy to damage the enemy while engaging the foe at the same time. This is what makes Frostworm such a great unit. Yes, the economic concerns are a problem, but believe it or not, given the dynamics of Kislev campaigns where you have so many foes, as I said, you will have so much post-battle loot money that you might as well be as rich as freaking Greenskins or Greases. And that is no small thing. So you can actually afford them as long as you keep fighting battles. So recruiting armies to fight more battles, or starting wars to pay for the current wars. That's kind of the motto of how to play a Kislev campaign properly. And Frostworms are a big part of that because they close the gap. They deal with monstrous units. They can deal with cast dwarf artillery if it really boils down to it, if you're struggling against that, if you're looking to conquer Zarnagrin. But yeah, this is available at tier 3. There is something missing, and that is, of course, the Griffin Legion. We'll talk about that in just a second. For an endgame Kislev army, there are several things to take into consideration in terms of the units you're going to bring. Obviously, it would not look like this. Too many monsters, too many cavalry units, not enough melee capability. Though you can make an entire monstrous army as Kislev, or an entire sled army if you want. That's a great thing. You have a great infantry army, a great ranged army, great cav, great monsters, great chariots. So many good options. One of that great options is not, however, Ice Guards with glaives or with dual swords. If you're going to recruit any Ice Guard unit, I'd strongly recommend you go for glaives, just that armor-piercing anti-large capability that brings them in melee. But here's the thing, they do not have the survivability of a lot of different units. Even Streltsy with their higher armor are better as a range unit, minus the whole situation with gunpowder units. Yes, they do have charge reflection. Yes, they have charge defense versus large. Yes, they have spell resistance, and all that is useful in very specific situations. The only benefit, really, of Ice Guard, or rather, there's 2 benefits of Ice Guards in a battle, or 3 if you want to consider the anti-large benefit in melee, so protecting flanks and all that. There are reasons to bring a couple of them, 2 or even 4 in an army, dependent on army setup, but the main reason Ice Guard is useful is magical attack, so when you're dealing with Bloodletters, Exalted Bloodletters, especially, or Greater Demons, that is the reason you may bring Ice Guard. Though, because they have magical attacks in both melee and range, and they can slow down units, which means that your range units in general have more time to deal damage with them. So that's their role. They're more of a support unit for Streltsy and other units. Like, Streltsy are useful throughout the course of your campaign, unless you just want to forego ranged units altogether, at least on foot. Then we have heavy war sleds. Let's talk about the units that you actually do want to recruit and and then the choices you do have. So heavy war sleds are just like light war sleds, just better. Yes, slower, undeniably so, as a unit, so that's one of the problems with them. They are slower than light war sleds, but they have a lot of armor piercing damage in melee. They lose out a bit on charge bonus, but they are just that much more freaking durable. These units will win against a lot of different elite units of the enemy that the enemy has. Obviously, anti-large melee units will rip them apart, but even if you're fighting, say, Chosen with shields or even dual weapons of Khorne, because that's usually what you'll encounter, they can still win. Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers, no. They would probably not win against Wrathmongers, but then Wrathmongers are just ridiculously good. But here you have a unit that may lose some of that skirmishing capability in terms of speed, but more than makes up for it for the pure punching capability it has in melee. Then you have Little Groms. Honestly, with Little Groms, yes, they're good single-entity artillery unit, but usually speaking, it's not worth going out of your way to recruit them because you can get allied recruitment for the sake of Imperial cannons, and when you're dealing with sieges and field battles, those are usually going to be better in field battles, especially. Let alone things like, organ guns, hellstorms, and all that. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good artillery unit for sieges, and it's also fairly durable enough in a field battle. Like, that's one of the benefits of Little Groms. You want to engage this thing in melee, good luck. It's led by war bears, so they have a good amount of armor. They have pretty decent damage in melee. They're actually quite scary, like as a single entity, or 2 entities really when you count the 2 war bears. They're not something to be trifled with. Then we have our cavalry units. Like, you still want to use Frostworm potentially throughout the course of your campaign, though if you want to replace them as a single entity, you can. You do have Griffin Legion. Like, Wing Lancers, pretty good unit. Never worth recruiting in a campaign when you can get freaking Griffin Legion at the same tier for Prague. So this is a tier 3 cavalry unit. These guys are freaking ridiculous. Good level of armor, bronze shield, huge level of charge bonus, or good amount of charge bonus. Not the best weapon strength, melee defense, all that, but in terms of shock cavalry unit, these guys are really damn good, and one of the best in the game, actually, because they get Glorious Charge, which doubles charge bonus duration, and enemy takes the leadership penalties as if they have been attacked in the flank. So, yeah, really damn good unit when you're looking to do cavalry charges. Then we have Warbear Riders. Warbear Riders are not really a charging unit. They're more of a kind of unit that goes into a fight and stays in there and wins. Stat-wise, may not necessarily tell you the whole picture, though, here. Because there's fewer entities per unit, so keep that in mind. But they do have a good amount of armor, good amount of leadership. They do cause fear. So do Griffin Legion. But yeah, the main benefit is that anti-large benefit, the armor-piercing weapon damage. This is the kind of unit that you use against enemy lords, enemy single entities, enemy cavalry, or pretty much anything. Obviously, they're not going to be as good at closing the gap as, some other units that you do have available in your roster, but the main benefit of Warbear Riders... the main benefit of Warbear Riders is not necessarily being a great charge cavalry, it's more about getting stuck in and winning the fight directly. Then you have your 2 big hitters, your high-end units, your single entities. You have Incarnate Elemental of Beasts and Elemental Bears. Usually, I'm gonna be quite frank about this, I just don't see the reason why you'd ever recruit an Incarnate Elemental of Beasts. Yes, it can technically do a bit more damage with that bonus versus infantry. It does have that charge bonus. It does have the same magical attacks as an Elemental Bear, but it's the question of durability. Like, it has less HP. It is faster than an Elemental Bear. It won't quite have some of the pathfinding issues, but honestly, if you're going to recruit a big single entity, one of the benefits there is with an Elemental Bear is it's a big-ass boy that has a breath attack that does frostbite on enemy, and once it's stuck in, very damn few things are going to be able to break it. Also, it has Wall Breaker, so not something to joke around about. So you have Chilling Aura, you have Wall Breaker, you have that physical resistance. I mean, both of them have physical resistance, though. You have Terror. Both of them have the downside, though, of being elementals, so that kind of creates a problem. Like, if you're losing leadership with them, they'll just disintegrate, so that is an issue. But yeah, usually speaking, I don't see them, like, I don't see Incarnate Elemental of Beast really worth it. Some benefits, some situations, spell resistance, yes, all that. But if I'm going to choose a unit, and both of them are expensive, keep in mind that. Both of them are annoying to recruit. You will want structures for both, but out of these two, if there's an elite unit that I'm looking to replace the Frostworm in particular, I'm going to go with Elemental Bears. Yes, they don't have the speed, but they do have a significant level of damage. And very importantly, they also slow down the enemy. So putting Frostbite on an enemy as Kislev, slowing them down, preventing their escape, is kind of a big deal. I mean, the Elemental Bear is a big deal. I also think there's more useful skills that can buff up an Elemental Bear than Incarnate Elemental Beasts, from what I recall. Though don't quote me on that, I might be remembering incorrectly. But yeah, usually speaking, I'm just gonna, if I'm picking a unit, most of the time I don't even recruit either of them, because Kislev campaigns are designed in such a nature that by the time you can even get tier 5 units, you've conquered half the freaking map, if not more. And you only get to tier 5. Like, you can abuse growth in certain ways in a Kislev campaigns and construction time and all that, but usually speaking, again, by the time you get to tier 5, you're just better off recruiting more lower tier armies than getting things like Elemental Bears. I mean, this is the same thing with, like, War Sleds, Little Groms, even War Bear Riders. It's like, by the time you get them, you may not need them, because the foes you're going to be dealing with, if you've pushed aggressively in your campaign, will not be able to counter, you know, things like Streltsy, Akshina army, a Tsargard army, a tier 3 army. In fact, out of the older units I have shown here, Griffin Legion is honestly the most useful that you recruit, because, beyond Tsargard, of course, the most useful because you can at least recruit them, and it's through a landmark, so you don't have to go spend building slots on a cavalry building chain just to get winged lancers. You got plenty of landmark slots, or building slots, in Prague, and it is a structure you usually want to get. So if you want cavalry, yeah, you recruit it for Prague. It's easy enough to increase that commandment, and the distances between settlements there, as well as the tier that you can get Prague. Like, you'll usually get Prague at tier 2 and get it to tier 3 reasonably quick, or you can confederate them at tier 3 if you protect them and get good diplomatic relations. So, generally speaking, Griffin Legion are the unit to get. Other things are choices. They're available, but outside of, like, essentially, out of this entire army, everything past the Frostworms is just like a choice of what you can recruit, though not necessarily something you will always recruit for a variety of reasons. That's all I have to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. I'll see you boys and girls on the next one.